Welcome, everyone, to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and on this podcast, I take a deep dive into the writing process behind some of the world's best songwriters. By way of background, I am a former English professor. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So this is a conversation about writing between two writers. My goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers, just as writers, plain and simple. So that's all we focus on. I don't care about tour stories, favorite bands, how bands get their name, favorite foods, anything like that. This is, again, a deep dive into the songwriting process with some of the world's best songwriters. And with that, let's get into today's episode. And today on the pod, Conor Oberst from Bright Eyes. Ooh, this is a good one. Their latest EP is called Kids Table. And I wrote down this quote that Conor told me during the interview. He said, "I am a professional daydreamer." But here's the catch-22. If you call yourself a daydreamer, can you really be a daydreamer? In other words, my struggle has always been as a writer, once you recognize that you're daydreaming, are you daydreaming anymore? And we talk all the time in these episodes about trying to find the eureka moment. When does the eureka moment happen? But the second you're aware that you're doing these things, are you doing them anymore? And that's always the struggle. So when can you daydream? When is daydreaming the most effective? One of the things I always talk about with songwriters also is the role of monotonous activities to getting that eureka moment. You know, whether you're in the shower or doing something like gardening or doing the dishes. We talk about this all the time. And a lot of songwriters tell me they get ideas while they are doing those monotonous activities. But here's something unique that Conor told me that no one's ever said, that he likes doing those mundane activities because they prohibit people from interrupting him. So in other words, they're not going to bother him while he's doing the dishes or gardening or folding laundry or anything like that. And I love that, hey, the reason why these are effective is because no one bothers me when I'm doing them. We went deep into the process on this. We talked a lot about the ritual, and he said that he likes to write while he's looking out of a window, especially as things are going by. So the role of movement. He writes during the in-between times. He doesn't write all the time. He writes during the in-between times because he needs distance to be able to get himself to separate from the intense parts of life. And hey, he actually mentioned dictaphones, the role of the dictaphone, not so much anymore, but when he was first starting out. And this is something I hear from songwriters often. He said that forgetting ideas is a good thing because, and he's okay with not writing everything down because if you forget it, it probably wasn't worth remembering anyway. Oh, and one more thing. When he's got that notebook out, he writes on the right side and the left side gets the alternative lines. So on the right side of the notebook, he writes the line that he thinks he's going to use, but on the left side of the notebook, he's got the alternative lines if that doesn't work out. So I thought that was interesting too. Anyway, this is a great episode. I love this one. And here it is, Conor Oberst from Bright Eyes. As a writer, do you think it's important to create in some fashion every day? Or do you think that pushing things will make things sound stale and derivative? I think people really, it's funny because if you talk to regular, prose writers, they will say button the seat every day, regardless. But few songwriters actually feel that way. So I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I know a few songwriters that think of it that way. I have never been like that. I started writing songs at the ripe old age of 12 and put out my first album, which was a cassette when I was 13. So it was just something that came natural to me. I learned guitar from my oldest brother and my dad both played guitar. So I just wanted to learn chords. And I often lament that I didn't have the teenage period that a lot of my music friends had, where they had the guitar magazines and the tablature, and they were like learning Metallica songs and all that. Because I just as soon as I learned like a couple chords, I like started writing songs. So that I was immediately drawn to putting the words down and the vocal melodies, and never really, I play piano and guitar like adequately, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't hire me to do either of those things. So I very much was centered on the writing right to begin with. And then for a long time it just like I wrote all the time, in my house, like even when we started touring in buses and hotel rooms and just anywhere, I was always writing. And as time went on, that slowed down a little bit. So I guess the closest I can get, um, I guess to your question is that in the last probably like decade, I feel like I have made a point to um, set set myself up with time, because I feel like to me, like writing, and or at least my style of songwriting, it's like a lot of it is stems from like daydreaming basically, and let it giving yourself time and space to like let your mind wander in ways that that isn't attached to anything too pressing as far as like day-to-day living stuff. It's like you got to kind of have time and space for your imagination to wander, at least I do. And so now, like, sometimes I'm lucky because I live in two different places, and I travel a lot, but I will, um purposely, like, if there's a lot of stuff happening in Omaha, like I'll go to LA where I know I can kind of be alone in my house, or vice versa. Find a place where there's less people around, and a little more time to be by myself and sort of just think and marinate on like kind of, I guess, like life. I mean, to me, like if I'm to try to sum it up pretty quickly, it's like, I think, I don't know, I was going to say all writers, but that's probably not true. But, it's really, to me, it's about n- n- giving my, I guess, take on like the human condition and what it is. We all know that life is simultaneously beautiful and horrible at the same time, and confusing and full of, just extreme highs and lows and everything in between. And so I also don't tend to write from like emotionally heightened states. Like if I'm real depressed, I don't want to do anything. I want to lay in bed. I don't want to. And if I'm really happy, like, oh, I fell in love, or I'm excited, it's like I want to be doing that. And so I tend to write in what I would call like ordinary times, in between times when it's easier to kind of reflect, without a little bit of, distance from the intense parts of life, I suppose.
So actually, one of my favorite Hemingway quotes that Hemingway said he could never write about Paris when he was in Paris. He needed
Yeah.
distance. And so that's always the thing with writers. Like, is it easier to write in the immediate aftermath of something, or is distance better? So it sounds like for you, you need a little bit of distance.
Yeah, because I think it's a process. It takes I think that what makes like humans in their artistic endeavors special. And I hope, not to get too into like modern times, but like I hope that AI doesn't take this away, because I think the human brain's ability to take in information and then synthesize it and put it back out into the world in you know an aggregate of all this stuff you've collected, and then putting it out with your own spin on it, that's essentially kind of art. And I think that just that time, or that process, takes time. And so I often think about like I'm going around my daily world and I'm picking up little artifacts, little pieces. I'm putting them into like a metaphorical satchel, and I'm carrying around, whether it's like a little conversation, or something I read, something I thought about, something, a experience I had, whatever. And then that all gets, dumped into my mind. And then that's kind of like a blender of my subconscious, my more critical thinking, whatever various states of minds I've been in while attempting to pull this off. And and then yeah, that's where the mystery still is to me. Like, why does my mind do what it does, and then what comes out? Half of it is like the fact that I've written so many songs in my life, and I do have tastes in what I think is cool when it comes to just stylistically writing and all that. And so there is that element, but there's also just the the things they don't really have words for. The just your imagination, your dream life, your unconscious, that is, what people call it soul, people call it whatever, and that's still what is mysterious to myself, about myself, but also I find it fascinating about all kinds of art that I like, wow, that came out of someone's mind. How crazy is that? And that's exciting.
You mentioned a metaphorical satchel, but I
Mm,
imagine songwriters usually tell me they have thousands of voice memos
yeah.
on their phones, and there's no organization to those memos whatsoever. So, is your memo, is it just filled with voice memos, and is there any organization to them?
There is no organization in it, and I I'm old enough that it started. I still write in notebooks. I'm not typing on my phone to write things down. I definitely use the when they came up with the voice memo, that was great because I used to travel. I used to always carry a dictaphone, with I had the little tapes and then I had the full size tapes, but I would always travel with that, and a lot of like early Bright Eyes records and stuff, all those like found sounds and weird stuff that's on those records was just because I always had a little tape recorder everywhere I went, and that was to capture my ideas. But then I often just ended up recording things that got sort of woven into recordings over the years. So yes, I am. I that is a there is a physical collecting going on as well.
How often do you go back to those?
You know, not very often, but usually if a sometimes there'll be a song or an idea for a song that is saved in that way, and I come back and specifically pull it out because there's something I remembered about it. But I also believe in kind of this self editing that takes place where it's like, okay, I say I have a melody, and a lot of times melodies just come to my head, and I try to record them. Sometimes I can't, but I always feel like the ideas, I forget a lot of ideas, but I think that that's a good thing because I think that I know there's ideas I don't forget. I know there's ideas that stick in my craw or whatever, and like they don't go away, and those are the better ideas. And so I sort of I've become okay with like, hey, you had what you thought was a good idea for a second, and now you can't remember it. Probably better you can't remember it because the ones you do remember are probably more worth the pursuit of finishing. Yeah,
Speaking of the dictaphone, so I had on Mary Chapin Carpenter about a
yeah.
month ago, and so so she told me, and I'd forgotten because I've interviewed some songwriters who've been around for since the '70s and '80s, and back then I didn't hear dictaphone very often. But what they would do is they would call their answering machine,
Ah,
and they would be on tour, and they'd come back and have an hour, hit play on the answering machine, if people know what that is. And they would
oh,
just, that's what they would do. They'd call their phones, and they'd have come home, and they'd have an hour's worth of melody and on their, isn't that hilarious?
I love that. That is so cool. That's I never did that, but that is amazing. That's like kind of reminds me of like when I first learned that a dial tone is an A note. So if you need to tune your guitar, you have an A
Wow.
on your dial tone. You can go
That's
bomb with
amazing.
your guitar. Yeah.
So do you get anxious then if you haven't created for a few days? Does that bother you, or are you good with that?
I'm good with that because a lot of times it's longer than that. It'll be a few months where I just sort of the the demands of living, supersede other my desires to create just because, I don't have kids. I'm divorced, but I've been in lots of relationships, whatever. But um, so in that sense, I maybe have a little more freedom than some people that have like whole families and stuff going on. But even me, like there's a lot of things that go into, I guess, being what I was talking to my friend who's a songwriter not too long ago, and it's like, yeah, it's weird when when your career and your life are so intertwined. You're kind of you're kind of on the clock all the time, and you're kind of expected. You need to be you. You need to like spend time being you and doing things, or else you're kind of just you're not refilling the source material. You're scraping the barrel because you didn't take time to live. I have this friend of mine was worried. She was like, she's working on a new record and worried that doesn't have enough songs and this and that. And I'm like, well, you've been on tour for 3 years straight, and your life, the things you wrote about on your last record, probably don't really apply that much because your life is so different than it was when you were writing that last record. And so it's just basically just saying, don't worry about it. Like it's gonna happen, but you to rush it or to force yourself, I think, is a mistake.
That tends to be, I do hear songwriters tell me that they are seasonal writers.
Yeah,
Whether that's like some of them actually write only in certain seasons. I mean, actually seasons of the calendar,
yeah,
and they're fine with that because they know that when they're ready to go, like the tank is overflowing.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I do hear that sometimes. Um, all right. So you mentioned pen and paper, and I could dedicate an entire podcast probably just to the brands of pen and the colors of ink and the types of paper. You have no idea, or maybe you do, of the, oh my gosh, people are incredibly particular about these things. And hey, that's part of the ritual. I'm the same way. I got a shitty hotel pen here. I can't write in that thing. I need that when I
Yeah,
have it home. So I'd love to get your
yeah.
take on how important that is to you.
And I'm not that particular with pens and stuff like that. I tend to buy the composition notebooks at the drugstore, all those. I like the ones with the hard with the cardboard outside just because they're a little
Yeah.
more durable in my backpack. But I also have really terrible handwriting, and I'm a pretty bad speller, even though I don't have like spell check to blame for that. But I went like not well, I guess it's several years ago now, but I went to like the Woody Guthrie Museum in Tulsa, and there's like this beautiful handwritten, like, this land is your land, the most beautiful penmanship. I'm like, did this guy really write like this, or did whatever? But like and like there's always songwriters like, oh, we found all these notebooks, and I'm like, God, I don't keep my notebooks. I hope no one ever finds them because they wouldn't really make, yeah, they wouldn't really make a lot of sense because what I do is like, okay, so if I have a notebook open, I'll start writing on the right side of the page. And then on the left side of the page, I write almost for every line, but for a lot of the lines, I write an alternative choice for the line. And I kind of go back and forth, and then I cross them out as I like make decisions. And so and then that'll go on for like several pages. And so if you looked at it, you'd just be like, what is going on? To me, it makes sense, but I don't know that it wouldn't be pretty to look at like in a museum or anything like that. That's for sure.
You actually don't have those notebooks there. You throw them away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't throw them away. I just lose them. So, I mean,
Yeah.
occasionally there's probably some laying around, but I definitely don't. I don't take them with me because, to me, like the document is the recording, and that's what that's the completion of the work, and the notebooks are just the kind of what gets me there. But again, I don't think it would be. I mean, it might be interesting if someone likes my songs to look at it, but it's definitely not like it's not like it's not the eloquent, beautiful Woody Guthrie handwriting. I'll say that.
So you're particular about the type of paper, but the pen doesn't matter. Is that
Pen
right?
doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah. I've written on a lot of hotel pens for sure. I'm actually kind of mad because they stopped putting pads and pens in a lot of hotels. And that's
There's
what I
one
was
piece of
like,
paper. I know. It's
yeah,
one
yeah,
singular piece of paper. I know. I noticed that
yeah.
too.
And
Um,
I love collect. I mean, I don't collect them really, but I would always take paper and pens from hotels just to have, and like, yeah, it's fun. Kind of sad that one's going away, but
so do you then, does it go from the notebook, then it goes to at some point to computer or no?
well, at this point, I'll make I'll make voice demos that just will get labeled like whatever the temporary title is, um and then version one, two, three, four, five, six as the song's getting written. So sometimes I'll go back, things will change as I'm going, and then I'll be like, wait, I sang a cooler melody like a while ago, like this, because some of this things will take place over like a couple weeks, and I'll be like, I know I sang a better part, and then I'll go back. I'll be on version 8, but I'll go back and listen to version 3 and be like, oh yeah, that's what I did. And so there's some of like referencing the work in progress as it goes on. Yeah,
All right. So another very specific question. When you are crossing things out, is it a single line or are you scribbling furiously so that you obliterate that word entirely? You laugh, but this is something that
yeah.
songwriters
It,
have very
it,
strong opinions on.
no, I do it both ways. If I still have some fondness for the line, it's a thin line. If it's one I'm like, that was really stupid, I don't want anyone to ever read that, then it's like a you know triple, quadruple cross out. Yeah,
It's funny. What you said reminded me. I have had Carl Bromel on a couple times from My
yeah,
Morning Jacket, and he
yeah,
said similar to what you do. He will write a line, and then what he'll do is he'll put like if it's a word he's not sure about, he'll just put two words above it. So he
yeah,
does, but it'll be one. He doesn't have like two sides of the notebook like you do. He just writes a
yeah,
line and then writes two words above it, and then sings the line three times and decide which one is the best that way.
yeah. And I'll do that somewhat too, where like it'll be above it or below it, or like a little parentheses after a word. Like if it's a you know it's an adjective that there's several adjectives that could be cool in the lyric. But and this took me a long time to realize, 'cause, like when I listen to old songs of mine, it's like stuffing tons of words into like a lot of unnecessary words, a lot of just cramming it into the couplets and like really wanting to get the idea across, when like less is more is sometimes the better answer. And then also like I never had really I guess it was like when I first started being friends with like Gillian Welch, she told me she which is a very, I guess, a pretty common term, but I just never came across it. I mean, her and Dave Rawlings, like, they went to like Berkeley and stuff, but they were like, it has to sing well. It has to sing well. And when I first I didn't really understand that at first, but now I totally understand that, which is just the vowels and what it sounds like coming out of your mouth for the sake of the melody. A word can be a great word on the paper, but if it doesn't sing well, it's kind of like you're cruising along on the train of the song, and then as a listener and you're fully in it, and then we call it just like it puts the brakes on the song. Like you hear one word that like is jarring in not a good way, and so it's like someone pulls the brakes and you're all of a sudden you're out of the song, and you're thinking about that word choice as opposed to like the feeling of the song or the overall, what you're trying to put across overall. So yeah, stuff has to sing well too, which I learned later in life.
How important is environment to you? Whether it's a room or a time of day or it's things you have to have with you. The ritual to me, I'm fascinated by the ritualistic aspect of the writer. So, whether like I said, time of day, chair, how important is that to you?
Nighttime is probably 80% of my writing. after the sun goes down and before the sun comes up. Um, yeah, I'm a if left to my own devices, I'm a stay up all night, sleep all day kind of guy. And so yeah, it's like when it's the quietest, least distractions, phone's not ringing. No, you know what I mean? So that's definitely nighttime's the right time for me.
And is there room or does that not matter?
Not so much. I mean, I this room I'm sitting in right here is like kind of my we call it the fun room in this house, but it's got like the record player and the piano and um it's kind of the I write a lot in this room. I if I'm right, piano I write I'm probably at this point like half and half writing on guitar and piano. So piano, obviously, you need a piano. So that limits your options. But I have a piano in my house in LA and here, and yeah, like sometimes I'll go like if I'm when I'm talking about going on these like little writing trips or whatever. Like sometimes I've done it too, where I've just like randomly got an Airbnb somewhere and like set up shop with myself for like a month and just worked on stuff. Like I remember doing that once and like rented this kind of like creepy pink mini mansion kind of thing like in Savannah, Georgia once and did it there and like just places that are like have a little romanticism to them and I'm really again it's kind of like being unavailable to the outside world. That's the key part. And so sometimes you got to get out of Dodge and really truly go somewhere, for at least I do to find that peace and quiet that's required.
I see that window behind you, and I think windows to me, I love having a window.
Yeah.
Is that important to you?
Yeah. I mean, because of the life I've had, I find that motion is really just in general is good for me. Like a lot of times, if I have, because the other thing I'll do, I would say most of my songs start with like, there'll be a couple lines of lyrics that come kind of with the melody that might be like the seed or starting point of the lyrics. But really, I, I can count on two hands of the whatever thousand songs I've written that were like finished on a page before there was any music or melody to it. That's very, very rare for me. So I will get a vocal melody to where I like it, and then I'll just like sing, goo goo gaga sounds to like get the melody, and then I'll cruise around with my headphones in, like on long walks, and just listen to that over and over again, and think about words as I'm walking around or on the bus or the plane and staring out the window. You know, I like that. I like looking out windows, like, especially if there's stuff going by, just makes you feel in the mood, I suppose.
So this is the other thing I'm fascinated by, um, and I like to talk to songwriters about is the role of not just the role of motion, but Agatha Christie said the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. So
Yeah.
so I take that to mean, and writers and songwriters tell me this also, and I feel the same way, that when your brains are engaged in unconscious activity, and I've heard things like gardening, cleaning, vacuuming, a repetitive thing that requires no thought. That's when
Mm,
the ideas come up. And that's why I read an article in the Washington Post last year about why we get our best ideas in the shower. And there's
yeah.
something about the monotony, that's when the unconscious happens. So I want
Yeah.
to talk about that before we talk about the motion, because that's a little more deliberate. But do you ever notice that you're getting ideas when you're doing something where your brain is just on a autopilot?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Like folding clothes, cleaning up your room, yeah, taking the dog for a walk, whatever. Just like, yeah, very mundane tasks where you're, again, for me, it's just that freedom to daydream. That's really what I'm looking for. And that goes great with mundane tasks because you're doing something which prohibits people from interrupting you. Like, hey man, I'm vacuuming the room, leave me alone. but but you're not just sitting there staring into space, which is great too, but a little harder to justify if you have a bunch of people asking you to do things, you know. So yeah, it's a way to get people off your back to be able to think, I think.
I like that you take it. I've never heard that take on it. That if you do those things like vacuuming, no one's going to bother you. I love the simplicity of that. Okay, but I'm always chasing the elusive eureka moment, and this is what we're
Mm,
talking about. So here's my concern is that the second we tell ourselves that we're daydreaming, we're not daydreaming.
right.
Because you mentioned that at the beginning, daydreaming, and I agree with you 100% that that's always the sense of if I go if I go take a walk and daydream, then I'm not daydreaming because I'm aware that I'm doing it. So
Yeah.
isn't that do you find that ever to be a struggle?
Well, I'm a professional daydreamer, so I can get into that
Writing that
pretty
down.
I can get into that mode pretty easily. My friend Jiha Lee, who played in Broad Eyes for many years, musician, songwriter, but she always used to like when we would be like on long van rides and stuff with the band or whatever, and I'm spacing off and looking wherever out the window. She would always say, "Oh, he's in his office. Yeah, don't bother him. He's in his office." You know, which I thought was kind of a nice way to put it. It's like, yeah, just let him. Don't talk to him. He's actually doing something. It might not look like he's doing something, but he is. You know, so
And I wonder then if there's a difference between when you're driving and when you're a passenger, if that makes a difference. And
mm,
yeah, what do
well,
you think?
well, well, I don't drive, so I'm always a passenger.
There, well, I have a quote up here. I've got some quotes, and this is what David Byrne said: "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other. But you can substitute driving for walking, hiking.
Yeah,
Um, I'm a big hiker, and when I come back from hikes, my voice memo is filled.
yeah,
Um, and or biking, hiking, walking. I think you can. It's kind of the same thing when your brain's on autopilot, but you're moving. Um, that's when it
yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I've had a lot of like friends and like significant others over the years that are like kind of baffled by like when do you write songs? Because you seem to always have new songs, but like I never see you doing it, you know? And so you'll know if I really trust you, if I really love you, if I feel really comfortable with you, I can write songs in front of you. But that's a very small group of people that actually see me like sitting and like writing in a notebook and doing it, you know, like Karina, my now ex-wife is still like one of my best friends. Like she saw it a lot. People like that, but like it's a very small group of people. I just don't feel comfortable. I'm the kind of person that doesn't really want awkward silence in a social situation. So I'm more likely to strike up a conversation or just do anything to kind of make the other person feel included. And writing is unless you're purposely like co-writing or in a band writing with someone, it's a very, it's a solitary pursuit, and I can't really have a lot of people there or witnessing it. It's a secret mission.
The writer Anthony Doerr told me once. I asked him. He wrote a book called "All the Light We Cannot See," and he's a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. And I interviewed him once, and he told me, I said, "What do you think about writer's block?" He stopped me. He said, "I don't believe in writer's block. Writer's block is a failure of courage." And that's always, I feel like that's so deep. And his thought was, don't
Yeah,
be afraid to write the bad stuff. That's why you have
right.
writer's block. There's something up there. And then I'm going to read another quote. I just have all these quotes from songwriters. And
Yeah,
that I've interviewed. Christian Lee Hudson told me, my biggest hurdle as a writer is trying to hack my brain to become less critical. And it's always that
yeah,
struggle of editing in your brain before it gets on the page. Just get it out there. So how good are you at
yeah.
that?
Yeah, Christian's a friend of mine, and I've actually written songs with him. Um, so yes, I agree with him. I think that you've got to yeah, you've got to be okay with failing, you've got to be okay with bad ideas, and hopefully somewhere along the line, if your goal is to have a finished recording or album that you're proud of, there's going to be people along the way that you have to trust and you have to be able to listen to. And again, that's a small list for me, but like, I point that way because this house is right there. But Mike Mogus, who's in Bright Eyes with me, and we've made a million records together, he doesn't consider himself a songwriter, but he's watched me write so many songs, and he'll tell me, like, he'll just be like, I don't know about that line. And I'm like, okay. Like I might like throw a little like, what do you mean? There's blah blah blah, that line's great or something, but like, but it immediately registers like, oh shit, Mike didn't like that line. Okay. So now I'm working on it again, even if I thought it was done. And so it's good to have those people in your life, whether they're just friends or actual collaborators, whatever, that you trust enough to like let into that, like, yeah, that inner monologue of like, is this terrible? Am I making a fool of myself? Is this like oversharing? Is it not cool to say this, or whatever? And like, yeah, to be, if you think you're right all the time, and you think you're writing a perfect song all the time, you're not. Your self doubt is, I think, a big part of the artistic process in general.
I was listening to Conan O'Brien's podcast, and he said something I wrote down, which is amazing. And he was telling a story about how someone was watching them in the writers' room at The Simpsons, and they imagined that when they were writing, they were all just sitting around laughing and having a great time. And instead, it was someone reading a line, and then the other one's just saying, "Yeah, that's good," or "That's not good," and that really surprised that person. And he said this. I wrote this down. A lot of writing is sitting and thinking and eating donuts. And I love that. And that's
Yeah.
comforting as a writer to know that my writing is taking place, even if I don't have the pen in front
Oh
of
yeah.
me. And I don't know that as silly as that quote is about eating donuts, I thought that's a really comforting thought that a lot of writing is actually involves not writing. That if you just know that, and I would tell my students that the writing process is taking place while you're eating and sleeping and showering and talking and walking, it just it lessens the anxiety. I think writing is a very anxiety producing process. And so anything I can do to lessen it.
Mhm. Yeah, and eh, I think, not to be too like highfalutin about it, but I think that like, if you're a writer, like, not that you can't learn anything, but if you're sort of, a natural kind of born writer, it's inside you all the time, and it's part of your DNA. It's part of your living process of it's in your life all the time. And so, yes, I'm saying I need to set aside time to go sit down to complete something or find space to actually like make the demos or make the thing. But but leading up to that is hours and hours of it churning in my mind.
I forgot to ask you this. Do you still have that first song you wrote when you were, I think, 12? Do you still have that?
Well, unfortunately, there's a whole record of songs I wrote around that time.
But do you
Oh,
have the
cassette,
actual
cassette.
lyrics? Do you have
Oh, no, no, I don't have like a physical writing of it, but there's recordings. Yeah, there's recordings.
It's funny because I never thought of myself as a writer. I think in high school, I was always told I was not a good writer. Um, and then my freshman year in college, my first paper, I wrote and I got an A. And it was amazing because no one had ever told me, like, that teacher saw something in me that no one else saw. And I actually still have that. So it's on a dot matrix printer, speaking of old school. And I
Yeah.
still have that. And I felt, wow, like that burst of confidence that she gave me made me think of myself as a writer. And that's all it took. And I mean, that woman has no idea the effect that had. It was a freshman college writing course. And I thought, wow, maybe I do have talent, but up to that point, it was the
Yeah.
first time. I don't know. I still have that
Yeah. No, I
extra.
mean, and when I was making those early recordings, at like 12, 13 years old, I had a friend group they're all kind of roughly like 5 years or so older than me that I played in bands with. I was always the young kid, like tagging along. And I think the fact that they were all musicians and songwriters, the fact that they took me seriously and wanted to help me get the songs recorded and help me get shows to play and all that stuff. I always say like I'm a product of like over over encouragement. I was encouraged too much as a child. That's probably why I'm like, whatever. Perhaps I've been accused of being pretentious at times because I didn't have that like, oh, I was immediately like validated by these older kids that I really looked up to, and I think that gave me the confidence to be like, okay, I'm in the club, I'm writing songs, I'm making records, dude, at how terrible those were and those songs is completely subjective and doesn't matter. I think that the fact that I believed because of them, I believed that I
Mhm.
was capable of doing it sort of gave me like a level of like rocket fuel to like really go for it when I probably shouldn't have had that confidence at that age.
Yeah.
It was sort of bestowed upon me by like very generous friends.
All right, let's end with this. I do find that songwriters, for the most part, are voracious readers or consumers of other types of art. Ernest Hemingway said all writers should go to art galleries to get inspired.
Mhm.
So, whether it's reading or other types of art, what other types of art do you draw inspiration from?
Well, I love to read. I've become less of a I've I've had a couple eye surgeries in my life, so reading there was a period where reading was difficult, so I kind of moved to like audiobooks, which has been good for me, but now I got to the age where it's like I'm wearing the reading glasses and I'm kind of back to reading again, so that's good. Yeah, and I think that's just good for your mind in general. I also didn't know a lot about visual art as a young person. Like I didn't I went to college for 3 semesters and dropped out to go on rock and roll tours. So I didn't get to take a proper like art history class and stuff like that. But like as I've grown older, I've definitely start to see the parallels between all this stuff. Like um even like I've been getting more into like fashion lately, lately is in like the last like 10 years, so I can look at like an Izzy Miyake like dress and be like, holy shit, like that doesn't look like what I've seen other people wear. It's like you can see this individual's voice in like
Mm,
fabric hanging on someone's body. And to me, that's because it creates the same feeling, as a song does or a painting does, and it's like that to me, that's so cool. Or architecture, it's not like I know tons about architecture, but like, you start to realize that these human pursuits that are all artistic, but it's just a very large umbrella. But what we're trying to do, I think, is communicate, art's communication and also self expression to like put your little flag in the ground of the universe and be like, I was here and this is what I saw, not that it is any more important than what other people are seeing, but this is the way I see the universe, and this is what I think is beautiful, or this is what I think is horrible or causes me sadness, and that universality to it all is I think why we desperately need more art in this world now more than ever. I mean, I know that people have been saying that forever, but I really believe that, especially with you know, all the coming AI and all the sort of eradication or supplication of the human mind to our computer overlords. I hope they don't crack that code. I hope they don't figure out. I hope it, right now it's like AI is like so see through, but it's also such a new technology. Like, what, 50 years from now, will it be see through at all? Maybe not. Maybe that synthesis that we're talking about that happens in the human mind will just be outsourced, which that causes me real deep sadness for like humankind and for like future generations. I hope it doesn't go that way, but we'll see.
Okay, we can't end on that note because that's too pessimistic. So I want to ask you about the authors. So when you read, are you a genre person or an author person? Like I don't. So for example, when I finish reading a book, my first thought is I want to read another author because I don't want to have that same voice in my head. So
Mm,
what is your? How do you decide who you like to read?
well, I mean, I'm interested in like obviously like new contemporary voices are always interesting because it's happening now. But I mean, if you were to like, whatever, put the proverbial gun to my head and be like, "What's your favorite?" I mean, I've been asked this question in interviews, and I guess I say it. I think it's true, or it's at least true enough, which is probably like East to Eden, Steinbeck. You know, as far as like if I'm going to pick my favorite book of all time, you know, it's kind of a normal answer, I suppose. But I read it when I was whatever, 20 or something. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is possible with language and the depth of like, describing like, the characters the temperature of the character's wife, you know she goes to bed, she's warm in the morning, it's like she's freezing cold, which is like a thing I've noticed in real life. It's like you lose that heat as you sleep, and it's like just those like observations that are like so undeniably true. But then when you take when you take it to the more symbolic, what does that mean as of us? Are we dying in our dreams? Are we waking up frozen? It's like just stuff like that. But I don't know. If you're looking for a short answer, I guess I would say that's maybe my favorite book. I don't know.
I actually don't hear Steinbeck very often.
Yeah.
It's funny because songwriters, I've heard it a few times, but um, songwriters tend to, I think, like the writers who value word economy like songwriters do. So I hear Vonnegut
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Like Vonnegut, Raymond Carver,
Yeah.
Hemingway. It kind of makes sense. Like I don't hear Charles Dickens, Jane Austen
Yeah.
very often.
Yeah. I mean, Steinbeck is very much a period piece, obviously,
Yeah.
California in that time period. Um, yeah, I mean, anyone that can like turn. I mean, I love like it's not. I also don't. I'm not like a. I don't really or I don't have a preference necessarily between fiction and nonfiction. Honestly, like I love Joan Didion. A lot of that's nonfiction. Um, yeah, so it's really when the voice feels like a genuine voice that I can come back to, like read a book, one of their books, and then, few years later, read another one of their books. And it's like, oh, I'm talking to my old friend again. There's that person. I miss them, That's the greatest. I mean, to me, that's what makes a great writer, someone you can
Uh,
recognize in the street of madness.
so you start a book and you don't like it. Do you have to finish it, or are you
No,
willing to quit it?
I've I've quit way more books than I finished, for sure.
Once I started to do that, it was so liberating. I used to be the kind of person that had to finish it, and it would drive me crazy. Once I said, fuck it,
I
I'm
mean,
done.
it does depend how far you get. I will say that. If you get past halfway point, it's like might as well finish it so you can just say you finished, so you can say you read it. But yeah, if it's a slog, I mean, if you're not in school, if you don't have to read it, fucking there's a bazillion books in the world. Just pick another one.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. You can find all of the old episodes on all major streaming platforms and probably some minor ones as well. You can also find them on the Songwriters on Process website. I started the site back in 2011, so that means there are hundreds upon hundreds of interviews with some of the world's best songwriters. So take a deep dive into some of those episodes. They are all great. Of course, I'm biased. Also, shameless plug. My book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, is out now on Hachette Books and in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God. And so we collaborated on his memoir. I'm biased, but that's a damn good book. Again, it is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir. And lastly, if you want to get in touch, go to the Songwriters on Process website. You can fill out a handy contact form and it'll get to me that way. You can also email me at ben@songwritersonprocess.com. I'm all ears. Send me your comments, your suggestions, your complaints, people you want me to interview. I get great suggestions all the time. I can't respond to all of the emails because I get a lot of them, but I do read all of them. And let me know your thoughts. If you have ideas for people you want me to interview, there's your chance. And with that, I am out. See you next time.